Well, hello, everybody. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to an announcement and a discussion that's taking place today on the National Index on Agri-Food Performance. This is the development of Canada's first Agri-Food Sustainability Index. My name is David McInnes. I'm a coordinator of this initiative, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce some people who are going to talk about this interesting development. So we have an announcement group that I'll come to shortly. Then we'll have a few minutes to have some questions for our media friends, should they want to pose anything to our three initial speakers. Then we'll be moving to a panel, and we will be having four people part of this panel, where we hope to really probe a little bit more on the global context, the marketplace context for this national index and this initiative. And this will be an opportunity then for you to pose some of your questions, and we'll be wrapping up in about an hour and a half. So thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bill Gruel, CEO of Protein Industries Canada. Bill, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David, and good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here today, and I'm excited to be taking part in the panel following this announcement. But before I get too far, I would like to acknowledge that I'm in Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm on Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. You know, Canada's agriculture and agri-food sector is an ever-changing industry. But one thing that has remained constant, and which is reflected in our advancements in technologies, the adoption of new practices, through the development of new commodities and being responsive to changes in consumer demand, is our commitment to sustainability. Everyone along the food chain, from producers through to ingredient and food manufacturers, retailers, recognizes the need for our agriculture and agri-food production and processing practices to be environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable. And they've all gone to great lengths to make their own operations as sustainable as possible. But one area in which we can improve is measuring and tackling our sustainability efforts. And so today I'm happy to announce a project that will help us reach that goal through the National Index for Agri-Food Performance. You know, at Protein Industries Canada, we really believe in collaboration. It's the cornerstone of cluster theory and the key to every one of our projects. And today, most of our projects have on average about 8 collaborators. But when we started just over 3 years ago, we only had about 3 collaborators per project. We've worked hard to grow the ecosystem and to encourage everyone within it to work together and help grow the sector. We often refer to ourselves as the connector or the catalyst for collaboration. And the almost 80 partners involved in this project encompass the entirety of Canada's agri-food sector. It's an incredible group of diverse organizations who all have one thing in common: an absolute passion for Canada's agri-food sector and a belief that by working together, we can make it better. Through their participation in this project, they're working to cohesively accomplish a single goal: furthering the sustainability of Canada's food production, and as importantly, building out an index of metrics and data related to sustainability. So when we say on the global stage, we produce the most sustainable food in the world, we have the data to prove that it's true. So I'm proud to say that not only has Protein Industries Canada been one of those partners since the index's launch, that we're announcing a project related to that index today. I'm pleased to announce a project that will advance the development of the National Index for Agri-Food Performance. Developing this index is not an easy job, but it's a necessary one. The sustainability indicators and metrics being developed will not only just be an industry tool. By utilizing them properly, will improve the trust in Canadian foods and ingredients, set up domestic policy, and distinguish Canada amongst our trading partners. And this will go a long way to improving our country's competitiveness in the global market. And from the plant-based food sector's perspective, help us meet the ever-growing demand for healthy, sustainable plant-based food and ingredient. As our sector works to supply the ingredients for 10% of the world's plant-based foods by 2035, having the ability to point to these metrics and indicators as proof of our sustainability claim will become increasingly important. I both commend and thank the partners working alongside us to develop and further this important work. The almost 80 organizations in doing so span Canada's agriculture and agri-food value chain and come from sectors such as financial services, innovation organizations, environmental NGOs, and federal and provincial governments. Such a diverse and long list is representative of our country's need and desire to develop this index and the need for the index to be approached nationally rather than by sector. While all of the index's partners are involved in the project, I'd like to recognize Pulse Canada and the Global Institute for Food Security at the University of Saskatchewan for taking on co-lead roles, as well as David McInnes for being a catalyst for the project. It's been David's passion, commitment, and drive that has brought this project to fruition. But more importantly, David has been tireless in bringing the entire sector together to advance Canada's position as the global leader in the production of sustainable crops, livestock, ingredients, and food. Leading this project requires a significant amount of time and work, and I appreciate Pulse Canada, GIS, and David for stepping up to take that on. I'd also like to thank Protein Industry Canada staff involved in this project. Quite a number of our staff have been involved, whether it's been helping to develop the index or this particular project, and they've worked hard to bring both to where they are today. And I can't thank them enough for their commitment. Finally, I'd certainly like to extend my thanks to Minister Champagne, Minister of Science, Innovation and Industry, and Minister Bibeau of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and everyone at the Government of Canada for their support of Protein Industry Canada and our partners. Together, we're helping improve and prove the sustainability efforts of our industry across the country while providing Canadians with healthy, sustainable food options. Thank you.
Well, Bill, thank you very much for those encouraging comments and for keeping the fire under our toes to keep moving, I think might be the signal I got. But also Protein Industries Canada has truly been a catalyst for change, enabling these 80 partners to come together. So thank you, and to your team who've been terribly supportive in our process. I'd like now to turn to Greg Cherwick, who's president of Pulse Canada, another one of our early partners and advocates for this initiative. So Greg, over to you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again to Bill for that excellent introduction. As mentioned, my name is Greg Cherwick. I am the president of Pulse Canada. We're a national industry association that represents growers, processors, and traders of peas, lentils, chickpeas, beans, and faba beans. Our industry really truly believes that the diets of the future and future food will bring together ingredients that are simultaneously nutritious and sustainable. As we work together as a pulse industry to position ourselves as a preferred ingredient supplier in this space, we have two key goals that drive us. One is to create conditions for growers and processors and exporters to monetize commitments that are being made to the global environment and sustainability initiatives. And secondly, to establish the Canadian pulse industry as a leader in providing food and ingredient solutions that promote health and decrease agriculture's impact on climate change. That's why we were early supporters of the National Index on Agri-Food Performance project. Developing a set of sustainability indicators and metrics that benchmark sustainability of Canada's agriculture industry aligns very well with our commitment to leverage evidence-based sustainability measurements that help the pulse industry capitalize on the push for transparency into where food comes from and how it's produced. Now, as a solutions provider in this space, we really do see the growing trend towards sustainability as a competitive advantage for us. And as a byproduct of meeting this new demand driver, we know we can also make an important contribution to achieve emissions reductions targets here in Canada as well. Today's announcement puts us one step closer to proving that Canada's plant-based foods industry and ingredients are environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable, a trifecta that will not only improve our environment, but it'll make us more competitive and help us put more money into the Canadian economy. We know that given a level playing field, Canada's pulse industry and the broader industry here in Canada can compete in any market around the world. And today's announcement shows that we're eager to prove it. I want to thank PIC and GIFs and all the groups involved in this important project, and you especially, David, for your leadership. And I look forward to what I believe is only the beginning of exciting things to come for our industry. Thanks again, David, and over to you.
Well, thanks, Greg, very much. And I really appreciate the emphasis on value driving in your remarks and helping to tee this up as well. And again, thank you for all your support. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Stephen Webb, Executive Director and CEO of the Global Institute for Food Security, another early partner who has been part of this index initiative. So, Steve, over to you.
Thank you, David. And as David mentioned, my name's Steve Webb. I don't go by doctor. It's just Steve. I am the CEO of the Global Institute for Food Security at the University of Saskatchewan. Canada is one of the largest and most sustainable producers of food. However, as we've heard today from both Bill and Greg, we don't have the comprehensive metrics package to prove it. And thanks to the work of the National Index on Agri-Food Performance Coalition, that broad, diverse group that Bill mentioned, and to the support from Protein Industries Canada and our co-lead partner, Pulse Canada, we're well on our way to delivering a transparent process that measures and shows how well we are performing on sustainable production and processing of food. These metrics will give consumers at home and abroad, as Greg mentioned, for trade, confidence in our leadership in food production. You can only improve what you can measure. So the metrics will also give us benchmarks that we can continuously improve on. The world is rapidly evolving. Populations are demanding more from agriculture, including responsibly and sustainably produced food and new food products. The consumer's power of choice is also growing immensely, and we see global and economic challenges becoming intertwined and not occurring in silos. There needs to be a whole systems approach to tackling these challenges and meeting consumer demand. This is the advantage of the National Index Coalition. There are the diversity of groups working together up and down the entire food value chain to show and improve Canada's agriculture and sustainable food leadership. At GIFTS, we believe innovation is a team sport, and we are pleased to support this initiative as it aligns with our mission. The National Index Coalition is looking to bring more partners on board. There's room for more producer groups, industry players, research institutions, governments, and nonprofits and others. We all need to work together on this. Our competition is not Alberta or Ontario or different sectors or even different industries. This is a game that involves Team Canada, and it only works when we work together. Thank you to Bill and Protein Industries Canada for its support, David for your leadership, and I want to thank all our National Index Agri-Food Performance Coalition partners for the collaborative work to improve Canada's leadership in sustainable food production. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Steve. And you've really emphasized the systems approach, which I think has been really a formative piece of this effort since day one. Thank you to all three of you for setting up this conversation, for announcing this, and again, for your support, Bill and Protein Industries Canada, and our two co-leads on this project, GIFTS and Pulse Canada. Are there any questions from the media who are on the line? Now, for the audience in general, I'm sorry, we're going to wait for you to come in to the conversation a little bit later. But if there's anyone from the media who'd like to pose a question, feel free to do so, and to please identify yourselves as you do. Okay, so if you do think of something, would like to either write something in the chat box, we will have this, we will bring that into the conversation, the panel that's coming up shortly. So there'll be an opportunity if you want to think up your juicy question for one of our panelists. I'm sure they'll be delighted to receive it. Bill, did you want to add anything to that, or shall I just proceed, just keep rolling?
Yeah, let's get into the discussion, David. Okay,
great. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to have a panel of four people. Bill and Greg, as you know, have just been introduced, but I'd also like to introduce Elena Cook, who is the chair of the Global Institute for Food Security. So Elena, welcome. And I'd like to welcome Janine Sekulak, who's the National Director of Agriculture and Agribusiness under the Canadian Commercial Banking arm of the Bank of Montreal. And BMO is a partner of our initiative as well. So just for the audience, we have a fair amount of time for discussion, and we'll try to bring your questions in if we can. and I'll do the best to try to moderate those or bring those into the discussion. But Elena, I'd like to start with you. From your perspective, we've heard Bill, we heard Steve, we heard Greg talk about how this is driving value and a little bit around the process of bringing people together. But let's step back for a second. What are some of these big global drivers of change? What's the global backdrop that we're really responding to here in Canada?
Yeah, well, good morning, David, and good morning, everyone. And thanks for this announcement today. Exciting, and certainly GIFS is really, excited to be part of this national initiative. I think, David, as I think about what are the drivers, for a while now, we have known that sustainability is a key driver. And I think now it's just fundamental to everything we're doing. Agriculture has always been looking to do more with less. We think about being able to produce, better crops, improved nutrition, different profiles and ingredients within the foods that we're producing to better meet end use specifics. But I think now sustainability is at the base of all of those things. That's an absolute key driver. And then within that sustainability are so many of the things that have always been the case for, world markets and for global drivers, but I think they've become even more demanding. So transparency, where is our food coming from? Where is it being sourced? The whole area of nutrition and healthy, and but also choice. I think Steve mentioned that in the announcement, and this came out yesterday in the Canadian Ag Day conversation that we had, which is really consumers in Canada and around the world are looking for choice. So they might be looking for choice in production method. They might be looking for choice in protein source. They might be looking for choice in protein enrichment. So Canada has all of the things that the global consumer is demanding, and sustainability is at the base of that. And that's why this index announcement is so exciting, is because I think it's all part of our Canada brand that we can offer for these demanding Canadian and global consumers. And I think, when I think about choice and I think about Canada, we've talked a lot about plants this morning, obviously, but, the livestock sector is also part of this index initiative and coalition. And of course, I think the entire agriculture and food supply chain has so much to offer on that sustainability, and has so much to offer on the choice that I think that global consumer is really looking to get in their food supply.
Well, thanks for that, Elena. And you touched on something that I think is important for our audience to appreciate. So Protein Industries Canada is dedicated to the plant protein sector. Certainly that's where Greg is focused on. Steve's work is involved in that. But really, Bill and Protein Industries Canada has enabled this from a food system standpoint, including all proteins, including the entire value chain up to retail. So I just kudos again to PIC for taking such a forward-thinking view of this. Janine, I'd like to bring you into the conversation because you offer a bit of a different perspective than perhaps the usual suspects, perhaps, but you bring a financial intermediary point of view. And there's a lot of work going on now in something called ESG, environmental social governance, which are, I'll let you explain that perhaps as to what this means, but it really is about how we might rethink risk and opportunity. And so from that global perspective, these big sort of global thinking trends around why a financial institution is interested in this work, maybe you have some observations to make here from your standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. No question. I think, for BMO, it's particularly important. We've made some pretty lofty commitments to climate and to sustainability, as many of our competitors have as well. And we've mobilized some, a relatively significant amount of capital to help us meet those commitments. And I think, to Elena's point, I think that agriculture has a really great story, always has. And I think that developing these metrics and establishing these benchmarks really helps to validate that story. I think I would compare it to financial statements, to financial reporting, really. I mean, at the end of the year, you can tell me that you had a great year and you hit all your targets, and I might even believe you, but by establishing a standardized, generally accepted methodology of evaluating those benchmarks on, against a global set of standards, I think just really adds credibility to that story. So I think from our standpoint, when we're looking to, to provide capital to projects or to primary producers or anyone along that value chain, I think being able to validate the story to really sort of set measurable goals by understanding where we're at today, I think it's really critically important when it comes to, to providing capital to the space.
So Jenny, can I just follow up very quickly? And then I'd like to bring Greg in on this assurance validation piece. When you're looking at how companies are fulfilling their commitments in the marketplace, what, from a standpoint of a lender or an investor, what are you really looking for here in terms of how to ensure that those commitments are being met? Now, the national index is not going to measure individual company or farm or even subsector performance. We're looking at a consolidated view, but just from a backdrop, how are you starting to rethink your valuation around risk as companies and sectors make these targets around sustainability?
Right. No, and that's a really great point. So as far as we're concerned and why we're excited to be part of the index is that it's providing a framework for the discussion. So it may not necessarily help us to evaluate an individual company or an individual producer, but it's really giving some structure to the discussion, which I think is, something that it's sort of lacking out there right now. It's a gap. So that's going to be incredibly helpful. I think we're thinking about risk differently. We're thinking about the economic impact of some of these projects a little differently. I think, obviously we depend on tangible security and established cash flows. But some of the, particularly in the plant protein space, some of these are relatively new markets. And I think that as we look to, we want to be in the space. BMO wants to participate and help get this. We believe there's a ton of opportunity here and a lot of future here. I think that having an established framework, having a set of metrics that helps us to assess that risk in that, it sort of de-risks that startup phase, right? It helps us to de-risk that. It gives us some framework from which to assess risk in a different way, if that makes sense.
No, that's great. And I think we could probably have a whole session, which I know Protein Industries Canada is going to do in April. There's a little message for those, a plug. So Greg, I'd like to sort of pick up where Janine was going. And this is around assurance, demonstrating commitment, assessing risk profiles around sustainability. And I'm going to sort of tag it to a question that someone asked around life cycle assessments that are taking place at the grower level and even within companies around how they're managing. So how are these assurance programs playing a formative role or an influential role at the producer level? And, ultimately I like to go and what the connection might be to the index, but let's start now from the bottom. We were sort of started from the top. Let's come right down to the bottom. And how are growers responding to this assurance-driven sort of environment that we seem to be in?
Well, if you want to start from the bottom, I'm going to take us back in time a little bit with my answer here and just give you a bit of history. We've been at Pulse Canada looking at sustainability, particularly as an opportunity, for quite some time. We hired our first director of sustainability back in 2007. One of the first major initiatives that we undertook with that new director of sustainability was a summary of research interviews. We went out into the marketplace and interviewed over 30 different leading companies and leading organizations that were active in the agri-food space, but particularly active in the area of sustainability. And the focus of this work was to understand how they'll be measuring environmental sustainability in their agricultural supply chains, and in particular, what that was going to mean for primary agriculture. So I am looping back to your question here, David. I mean, what was interesting then, and we called that paper, by the way, that paper was published February of 2011. We called that paper Measure What Matters. And I think in a way, the title says it all, doesn't it, as it relates back to the National Agri-Food Index. But leaders in sustainable agriculture and agri-food over a decade ago were focused on evidence-based sustainability metrics, and they placed a priority in 4 key areas: greenhouse gas emissions, water use, biodiversity, and to a certain extent, even soil health back then. So, we've been working with the view that it is going to be about demonstrating your ability to affect change, to prove that you're from an outcomes-based performance perspective, that you can contribute to a reduction in emissions within the food industry. And I think that's led us to undertake a lot of different work on a life cycle analysis basis, and just a few key things that we've been working on over the past number of years. One goes back a little ways and relates to our work with reformulating food products. So undertaking life cycle analysis on cereal-based products by combining pea flour and lentil flour with cereals, durum wheat, for example, to understand the impact of reduction of emissions associated with a processed food product. So that type of research demonstrates that when you reformulate to use plant-based ingredients, and in particular to incorporate pulse-based ingredients, you can achieve GHG emissions reductions associated with processed food products. We've done that in partnership with other food products as well, with beef. In particular, we substituted lentils in a standard beef patty and achieved a 30% reduction in emissions associated with that beef. We've more recently done that type of work with feed rations. So looking at incorporating peas into swine rations to achieve a reduction in processed pork of 30% in terms of GHG emissions. So the work that we're doing to enhance the quality of the data that's informing the LCA databases that allows food companies to do the work that I'm just explaining to you is exciting to our industry. And again, it allows us to look at environmental sustainability through the lens of opportunity. How is it that we as growers and members of the trade can leverage this opportunity to really make Canadian plant-based ingredients, and in particular pulse-based ingredients hard to substitute in this new space that we believe is going to be a driver well into the future. And that's a space that optimizes and prioritizes human health and environmental health.
Greg, thank you very much. And as we talk, and I'm going to sort of signal to Bill here to bring you in, because when you made your introductory comments, and you talked, if I recall correctly, about the proof of sustainability claim being so fundamental to the marketplace or the evolving marketplace. Greg has gone right down and expressed what they're doing at the farm level, within the sector level. So you're taking a broader look at the plant protein sector. How is this going to drive new value overall? And do we have the ecosystem, the broad, not environmental ecosystem, but the conditions across the economy, financial services, technology, research, government regulation? Do we have the ecosystem in place to support this move to prove sustainability claims? Because it's not just a data chase that we're talking about. It's not just about coming up with a bunch of metrics. There's a lot more. And Greg really opened that door on this a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I'll maybe start by just musing a little bit on the conversations that I get to have with ingredient and food manufacturers on a weekly basis. And so we talk to organizations that are interested in what's happening in Western Canada or Canada from ingredient manufacturing, plant-based food production. You can't get 5 minutes into that conversation without the question of sustainability coming up, and companies talking about their interest in Canada being driven by the sustainability of ingredients. And then very quickly after it shifts to how can we prove that? And so I've been knocking around the sector for a couple years now. We've been talking about sustainability, and I think, this is an oversimplification, but we used to be able to show a picture of a canola field with some mountains in the background and our beautiful environment and say, look at us, we're sustainable. And everybody would smile and nod. Companies are more sophisticated today. Consumers are more sophisticated today. And so it behooves us to make sure that we are being able to prove out those sustainability metrics. And it comes back to a little bit about what Elena was talking about in terms of the drivers and choice, because everybody is going to define that sustainability metric differently. Its production method, its carbon footprint, its biodiversity, its water use. So that's just a little more context as to why this is so critical. David, your question though there was two, how will this drive value? I think, we have to be realistic in Canada that we're likely not going to be the lowest cost provider of food products on a global basis. And for good reason. We have a lot of value in the food that we're producing from this environmentally sustainable perspective, from the nutrition, from the choice that we're providing consumers, from the diversity of products that we're providing. So we don't aim to be the lowest cost provider, but if we aim to extract the value that is inherent in our crops, ingredients, and food products, we have to understand these questions around sustainability so we can use that to drive value. So I think that's the beauty of this topic, is that it not only drives value from the consumer's perspective because we are offering sustainable products, it drives value for producers, for ingredient manufacturers, and food producers that can capture incremental value because of those claims if we can prove them. So I think that drives value in two ways. So it's a really elegant way to approach the market in terms of value, not only from an environmental perspective, but also from increasing the overall commercial value of our sector. And then, David, you asked if we have the ecosystem in place. It's coming. We've got a lot of work to do yet in Canada, but I would say, again, having knocked around the sector for a long time, this is the first time that we've really brought this broad sector of the agri-food industry together to really think about this. And I couldn't be more happy that the livestock sector is involved in this project, because it goes right back to Steve Webb's comments in his opening. This is about Team Canada and the sustainability of our overall agri-food sector. We've all got to take care of ourselves. I've got to take care of myself in terms of the plant-based food sector, but this is really about Canada's agri-food sector and driving sustainability and understanding it across all of it. So do we have the ecosystem in place? There's always more that we can do there, David. This is a great first step in terms of bringing that value chain together from start to finish.
Well, thanks, Bill. And Elena, this seems like a perfect question for you, given your experience and background, but it's about where Bill left off. And I'm going to summarize it this way. Bill, you really have, and picking up where Steve sort of left us initially, which is we need a whole of sector approach here, which is why this coalition of 80, I think, has been possible. We often talk about a whole of government, but really it's a whole of food system approach to respond to these, to meet the needs of the consumer and the marketplace, to back up the claims and to align things, research, regulation, trade policy, innovation, to line up behind what needs to be done to be demonstrated. So have we sort of are we going through a bit of a shift in thinking where the traditional sort of, well, government just needs to we just need a whole of government approach to fix stuff. Are we really talking here about a whole of food system approach? Is that possible? Is that too much of a big bite? What would be your thoughts, Elena?
Well, I mean, I hope we're talking about a whole systems approach here, David. That'll be the only, that'll be the easiest path to success. And I think, frankly, the only path to get us where we need to get to. When I think about the question that you asked, both Greg and Bill, about, a little bit about what does this maybe mean at the farmer? What does this mean at the production level? You know, I might just reflect as a farmer first and say, you know, it's tough enough for us to produce a food, considering all the challenges thrown at us with climate and markets, etc. You know, this is ongoing challenges, and then we're putting in measurement as something that I think farmers may find, you know, complex and a bit of a challenge. And I guess I would like to say, if we think about the whole systems approach, for sure, farmers are a key part of this. And I like Greg's term, which is that we need to look at sustainability through the lens of opportunity. And I think that's where farmers really need to shift. Many farmers are already there. You know, we have got so much improvement in Canada when we think about, you know, our lower environmental impact and our sustainable practices. The exciting part is now this benchmarking is going to prove it up. We've made so much great progress, but we do need to bring farmers along, and for them, the value is market access and new buyers. Even if you look at the Canadian market, you look at all the investment in value added, new buyers for the products for us. That means, you know, better prices, maybe assured markets, assured buyers. So I think there is all kinds of opportunity for farmers. And then when I think about the whole systems approach, you know, we I think sometimes as an industry think, well, you know, government can you know, just decide what it is, and then we'll figure out how we're going to achieve it. And I think nothing could be further from ideal than that. You know, I used to always say as a deputy minister, you know, I'm, you know, with the government, you invite me into your house. If you don't figure out what you as an industry want to do, you invite me into your house, I will never leave. And I would say that's what's exciting about this index work is, let's decide as an industry a full systems approach, all components of agriculture and food. Let's decide, you know, what is the measurement that makes sense? What is the benchmarking and the metrics that are going to work in a practical way for our sector that can prove ourselves from a Canada brand perspective, and then be able to deliver that to the federal government to say, we can be the solution. We can lower emissions. We can be these you know, global targets that Canada has, you know, put forward. And it can't be a government initiative. It has to be a systems approach. It has to be industry driven, you know, and then government can figure out how they, in a science-based way, you know, and a practical way, have the right regulations and standards in place. So I think it's absolutely critical that industry drives it. That's why it's exciting to see the coalition that's already formed around the index. And I hope now that this announcement gets out, then there's even more awareness about it. We'll see more joining. That'll be key, is to see this coalition grow.
Well, thanks, Elena. I'm gonna turn a little bit to Janine to get a different perspective. So Janine, often in agriculture and food in this country, we feel that the sector doesn't sort of get the attention it deserves or needs from government, from policy, from players generally. Often people don't know, for example, that food processing is the largest employer, exceeding that of the automotive sector and the aerospace sector combined. That's sort of an awakening notion for a lot of people. From your standpoint, how do you see, and I know you're dedicated to the space, so it's an unfair question, I get it, but how do you see the agri-food sector compared to the progress that perhaps it is making around this national index to align around sustainability versus perhaps some other sectors of the economy that you might have some familiarity with? Are we ahead? Are we behind? Are we keeping pace? Or do we have? Give us a little perspective on what you might be seeing Canada-wide, or even from a global perspective.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a great question. First of all, Elena, I wanted to give you a standing ovation. I completely agree with the fact that this is industry driven and that there's participants in this project from across the whole value chain, right from producers on up, I think is a huge selling or a huge benefit to this initiative. And I think that is what sets it apart from what's happening in other sectors. and also in other jurisdictions. Like I spent some time recently in the US with some of our colleagues down there, and it certainly is a discussion that's being had. It is certainly, it's on the radar, so in terms of sustainable agriculture and what does that mean for producers and all of that. But I don't see anywhere else in my travels, anywhere in my frame of reference, where we have this kind of cooperation from this many, levels of the value chain. So I think that's really setting us apart. And I think that this is, further along than it sounds. You know what I mean? Having because we're involved in it, having had the opportunity to look at some of the indicators and see some of the material that's coming out of this, I think that you've made incredibly great progress, and I think that I think it's industry leading from a global or from a North American perspective for sure. And in terms of what other sectors are doing, I think that maybe that's been the miss, is that it's fragmented in other sectors, if that makes sense. And this is a real, industry view, like the whole supply chain. So I think that is really the major advantage here.
Well, thanks. And so in a sense, you're pointing, I think, to Greg's initial comment around competitive advantage, which so Greg, I'm signaling to you that I'm going to come to you next, but just something I want to comment on, Janine, around what you said, because it's been fascinating to be part of the dialogues with the partners, the 80 partners in all of the projects. I won't get into all that stuff now, but what has been fascinating is the tenor and caliber of the dialogue in trying to come up with the indicators and sub-indicators, and trying to understand how we interpret what's going on globally to develop for the Canadian context. And where I'm going with this is it really is people are there to represent their organizations, as they should, but people are there taking the broader common view as to how do we move the sector as a whole forward, or the country. It's been a remarkable, consistent tone in that approach. And I think you've just underscored the importance. There's a competitive reason for this. And I didn't appreciate your point. I mean, when you look at other sectors or even other jurisdictions, this is an opportunity perhaps we haven't really fully appreciated. So, Greg, you talked about this at the beginning. How can measuring, benchmarking performance and aligning around this actually be a competitive advantage?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what our focus has been for quite some time, as I mentioned. And as Elena referenced, we look at the theme of sustainability through the lens of opportunity. I'll throw out a few numbers here for you that are specific to the pulse industry. From 2015 to 2020, there was a 500% increase in new product launches that incorporated pulses and pulse ingredients. Between 2015 and 2020, 27% of meat substitutes in the global packaged food market contained pulses. Global pea protein usage over that period of time grew at a compound annual growth rate of 26%, which outpaced any other plant-based protein in the market. The reports that have been commissioned by PIC that were conducted by Ernst & Young estimate that the plant-based meat market will grow between 85 billion and 143 billion by 2035. Lots of numbers for you. There's some specifics there with respect to the opportunities and how the pulse industry is capitalizing on some of this, on this trend towards plant-based protein. But for us to believe that all we need to do is sit back and ride this wave, and that we'll continue to be the preferred source of protein because there's a trend towards plant-based protein, I think is wrong. And we've recognized that for quite some time. From a pulse industry perspective, we know that this plant-based food space, generally speaking, is going to become more competitive. Beyond plant-based ingredients, the alternative protein space is becoming more competitive. So everything from cell-based meat to insect protein, right? This is not something that the pulse industry specifically can sit back and kind of cross their fingers and hope to continue to benefit from. We are going to have to demonstrate how we can contribute to nutrient density to make products more nutritious. So it's not going to be enough to just be plant-based. We are going to have to enhance the nutritional profile of the foods that we put on people's plates. And simultaneously, we're going to have to demonstrate how we can make a contribution from an environmental perspective, how we can reduce the impact of those food products. And that will come through our ability to provide assurances in the way of data and evidence. This is not, to Bill's earlier point, about cool and pristine Canadian environments, fresh water and snow-capped mountains. This is about a more sophisticated branding approach where we rely on, the systems that are in place on farm and our ability to track performance, to benchmark, to track and report on progress and continuously improve our performance so that we can stand apart as a country putting ingredients into foods and on people's plates that are, again, simultaneously more nutritious and more sustainable. I think that is an opportunity for Canada to set itself apart from the rest.
Yeah, that you've really laid down the building blocks. I'd like to just turn it open to our other panelists, whether they have something on their mind here. Just as a footnote, we actually do have an insect protein partner, part of our partnership, part of our coalition. So I think that adds to that diversity. Would anyone else like to build on where Greg is going around competitive advantage? Elena or Bill to start, and then maybe, or Janine, anyone like to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll maybe just echo what Greg has said. And one of the things that we're talking a little bit about today is kind of a whole of Canadian approach around sustainability. But Greg opened up a whole new area that we need to think about, and that's all of the things that we need to do in Canada to be competitive. And that's investment in innovation. It's building out our ingredient processing infrastructure. It's making sure that we understand our end use customer demands, not only around sustainability, but everything else that they're looking for in terms of, new product iteration, nutritional requirements, all of that. And so, I think my only point, David, is that, this approach to a broad sector approach, thinking about sustainability, is something we likely need to replicate across all of the agri-food sector in Canada to make sure that we're meeting, all of our end use customer demands, because we can't take any of these things in isolation.
Yeah, and there's another aspect to sustainability we haven't spoken about that I'd like to make sure that we do, because it is as fundamental to a successful and trusted food system as meeting the climate change challenge, and that is social sustainability, an inclusive, diverse workforce and sector that makes opportunities for population segments that have been long underrepresented. How are you seeing these changes? I'm just going to open for anyone wants to jump in. How are we responding adequately enough to meet those important sustainability? In fact, that should be the first thing we should be talking about, which is we need the right people in the right places to do the right things before we even talk about anything else. So, would anyone like to make a comment on the social aspect?
Well, I mean, I think, David, the social side, so the benefit to society that, we're all in this together, that is also part of sustainability. I mean, I think when we think about sustainability, too often we think about environmental sustainability, but just as important in sustainability, there's really three components. Environmental absolutely is the one that is often getting the light shone on it, but social sustainability, ensuring that there's benefits to society, that everybody has opportunity, that everybody sees their value in the system, that there is benefits to society of the sustainability initiatives is also key, as well as economic sustainability, because this is all great, for us to think about what we're trying to achieve from a sustainability perspective. But if none of us in the agriculture and food sector, particularly producers, can actually make a living at it, then it's all for naught. Then we'll achieve very little, right? Canada, and this picks up on Greg's comments about competitiveness. There's many world players. There's many food sources. Canada has been a giant as an exporter, particularly of bulk food, particularly Saskatchewan's been a giant in that. But, we're seeing more and more competition all the time. So we need to ensure that we're thinking about all of those components of sustainability as we drive forward on this. And I guess in this, I might just, before I let the microphone go, David, I might just pick up on, your comment earlier about, what does this mean for all of us in the value chain? And I think, it's about having that practical approach as a sector. It's about having everybody in the room together. And it is about having government provide us with enabling regulatory frameworks and, an enabling business climate so that we can have all components of sustainability come to play. So we know there's targets. We know it's key to have measures. This index will drive, I think, some of those practical measures that we can achieve so that all three components of sustainability can be achieved. And we're all in this together, right? If I even think from the crop side, I'm a pulse producer. I grow peas. I know the yellow peas that we're growing here eventually end up in Asia. But we also grow canola. We also grow hard spring wheat. We also grow flax. And it's the value of the crop rotation that really helps to drive the value in all of the crops that we're growing, including pulses. So, and then if you think about, the rest of the value chain, livestock production, other protein sources, dairy, poultry, whatever the case might be, we're all in this together. So, we all win if we remember that. And I think that's also key on the sustainability story as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Just before we go to a couple of questions to those who might be listening in, we have a couple ready to go. Janine, I just want to give you a chance to reflect on the social sustainability side. And this is the S in ESG. We've spent a lot of time talking about the E in ESG. Any observations to make around or guidance for us, advice, things that we shouldn't do or maybe we should do or do better as we think about this benchmark of sustainability?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I completely agree with Elena's comment that we tend to focus on the E in ESG, and I think that it's the one that's the most. It's arguably in our purview the most. But I think the S really comes down to communities, like healthy communities, right? And that's really, and I think that agriculture and that whole rural production agriculture in particular really drives a lot of that, right? So I think creating employment and I think it even encompasses things like food safety, right? Food security, all that stuff. Those are social benefits that come from this food system. So I think that those are critically important. And I agree that having the policy framework, that I think we have we have a solid sustainable production, primary production industry in Canada. I think that having that perspective at the table through the development of the index is critically important, because these benefits need to drive down, like as Elena said too, like if without those primary producers, really none of us have jobs, that none of us exist. So critically important that these benefits drive down to that level.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's talk about some of the mechanics. Now, I know that we're deep into developing the index, and it's sort of like making a sausage right now. And so I guess that's with the plant protein audience here. Maybe I should choose a better metaphor, but nevertheless, I think you know what I'm getting at. We're working our way through a lot of issues. Nothing has been officially announced on what the indicators are going to look like. That's going to come in May, when we're going to sort of fill out the story about what this is going to really look like. So I realize we can't get too much into this, but let's just talk a little bit about something at a high level that's trying to provide a consolidated view of sustainability indicators. So on biodiversity or social inclusion, or how do we measure innovation or our greenhouse gas emissions. So those are sort of the big things that we're trying to pull together. Yet the producer or an individual company are grappling with their own metrics, how to be efficient, how to ensure profitability, how to manage their inputs. I mean, they're looking at their own metrics, if you will, and sectors or subsectors, whether it's in the beef, sustainable crops, sustainable beef initiatives, among others, are looking at what has to be done within their sectors themselves. So we've got a lot of different perspectives to how we measure. And one of the challenges that we're facing, and as we think about this index, is where is that line? How do we not get into the way or get in the way of an individual company and producer or even a government in terms of how they measure sustainability? And that's why we're sort of taking this high level consolidated view. So as you think about this, is this a bit of a recipe for too much tension and maybe unraveling this systems approach that we're talking about? How do we sort through these things on an ongoing basis? So I'm actually starting to point a little bit to the G. What's the G in ESG? Governance. How do we manage this going forward, where people have got proprietary data, proprietary networks, proprietary measures, yet we're trying to think about this at a high level. How do we manage this going forward in your view? And we're not trying to get into the details of the index development, because that's sort of an ongoing process, but we are starting to uncover a bit of the G aspect here. How do we manage this going forward? I'm not sure who'd like to take that on first, but Bill, you're seemingly managing this across the plant protein sector as a whole, about how you manage things and improve transparency. What are some thoughts you might have?
Yeah, I think, it comes down to the recognition that we have to think about this in the Canadian context of agri-food and position ourselves globally as a sustainable supplier of food products and ingredients, commodities, however you want to cut that, but also needs to be compatible with individual companies. And individual organizations have different drivers, and they're going to have relationships with their end use customers as well. And so they might be measuring sustainability in terms of 3 or 4 criteria. And so I think there's a question that we have to create compatibility between the systems, and hopefully most organizations who will have individual metrics that they're measuring to, for their own sustainability, for their own corporate governance requirements, or, to drive efficiency in their own operations, hopefully that those metrics ladder up to what it is that we're trying to do on an aggregate basis. It won't be a perfect, one-for-one match, David. I'm sure of that. And I think we also have to recognize that at the other end of this are consumers and companies that are purchasing products from Canada that, we can't always anticipate what is going to be the driver for the purchase of food products and ingredients at that end. So, this will be evolving. It will be changing from time to time. And, we're not going to get it 100% right. But I think starting out thinking about the compatibility between individual organization goals and objectives, what we're trying to do at the national level, making sure that we've got line of sight and open dialogue is the most important first step, because we're not going to get it exactly right in the first cut.
Well, thanks, Bill. And in fact, one of the question that was posed was, how does this initiative link to the Canadian roundtables for crops and beef, the 2 roundtables? They're actually partners of this initiative. And for a couple of reasons. One is that we can learn from them how they have managed to organize themselves within their supply chains around coming up with common metrics and methodologies to share. But we're also going to be benefiting from the thinking about how we might work cross-sectorally. And so we actually have a project that's part of our repertoire of work here about how do we share appropriate metrics that maybe can enhance what the index will look like down the road, but the only way that that's going to be possible are to have sort of forthright, good conversations between groups that might not have really spoken a lot before about some of this at a granular level. So we're working our way through this. In a way, it's a governance issue. In a way, it's how to make the system, the food system conversation actually operational, if you will, from the standpoint of, or the lens of looking at sustainability. Elena, do you have anything you'd like to share around how sectors might interrelate to each other, given how diverse this agri-food economy is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is the challenge, not only, you know, diversity amongst sectors, but even diversity from east to west, or, you know, like there's lots of ways for us to find, you know, differences. But I think the key is for us to all agree that this is about, you know, making a difference for us here in Canada, making sure that we continue to gain consumers' confidence, you know, maintain it, build on it, maintain market access, you know, because we've got this agreed upon approach, national approach, despite our differences. So, you know, it's to find some baselines to be able to improve ourselves against maybe some global, you know, comparators, certainly our global competitors. You know, it's developing the tools and technology to be able to measure what's really important, compiling and communicating it. So for each sector, maybe there's something that has a little more emphasis than others, but if we agreed upon the baseline, we've agreed upon the approach, we've agreed upon the collaboration, I think that's much further along than we've been so far. And then it's about that targeted investment on measuring the right things in the value chain, and you know, proving up and continuously improving our sustainable practices, whether that's at the production level or at the processing level or at the transporting level. You know, you think about what our value chain looks like. We're a pretty, you know, mixed group, you know, east, west, you know, at the beginning and the end, when we think about, you know, how much we need to work together. But there's lots of common goals, and that's what's going to have to drive this initiative, because, you know, we know right now things seem kind of divided and everybody's looking for differences in society. So agriculture and food better get its act together. And I think this index is a great way to bring us together. And I would just say this too, David, is that innovation is key for all of us, no matter what component of the value chain, no matter what sector. And so in that, that's the key to continuous improvement, right? And so we need to see that not just, you know, agreed upon measurement, but also agreed upon focus on innovation, continuous investment. And then again, that I know I always go back to it, but policy really matters. Policy matters because the regulations need to enable that innovation, need to ensure that we can attract that investment, that it's, you know, it's a very optimistic future that we've got in agriculture and food. So let's make sure that we continue to see that investment in innovation. At the Global Institute for Food Security, we're just one player in this large ecosystem, but you know, it absolutely, Canada absolutely needs to remain focused on innovation. That's what's driven our success so far in our industry. It absolutely is going to be even more valuable as we think about this evolving, you know, global marketplace and global demands.
Well, there's a lot in what you're saying to lift off of, but just I'm going to pick up on one thing. I'm going to signal to Greg. I'm going to come to you next around the policy lens that the index might provide. But a quick comment on just what you've said around how important this is to be used across the sector to align folks or players across the sector. There were a couple of questions in the chat box around how can this be comparable to global best practice, or I'm paraphrasing, or how we can compare to our global competitors. And I think you've said something, Elena, that I really think we should isolate, that we don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, that just building this index, getting and maintaining alignment of the 80, if you will, and more to come, hopefully, is itself a huge, big first step. It's not, the index actually, as it's being designed now, is not going to be comparing itself to other countries. That requires a lot more time and resources and capacity. That is perhaps an ultimate objective down the road. But I wanted to lock in on what you identified as perhaps a key deliverable, or to isolate a success factor, which is to at least keep the diversity of folks together to build this. And then we can figure out how we can leverage it, step it up, and use it to really deploy in the marketplace over time, such as comparing against our friends in the United States or in Europe or wherever they may be, so that we can really express that advantage in the marketplace. So I think that's the trajectory, but we're taking measured steps to get there, hopefully accelerated measured steps, if that's a new phrase to use. Greg, coming to you, Elena also touched on and sort of got into the policy aspect and the importance of it. And Elena's mentioned that a couple of times. So how can this index become perhaps a new lens to look at policy issues? And Janine, I'm going to actually come to you after Greg with the same question, but you're going to come at it, I think, from a different perspective, perhaps. But how do we reframe policy choices with better benchmarking in mind, or at least trying to get better benchmarking? What's the opportunity here?
Well, I think we're in a place now today where we have an expectation that the policy environment, the regulatory environment, the legislative environment that we operate in is informed by evidence. And we've also made the case and continue to make the case that environment also has to be an environment where there's a theme of continuous improvement. And you can only look at improving policy in creating an enabling regulatory and legislative environment if you have good quality data and information informing those decisions. I'll take you down a parallel track now, and one of the themes that's kind of seizing everybody today is this, is the issue of our supply chains in Canada, and how they're not particularly functioning well right now, and certainly not serving the interests of the industry very well, particularly in the area of containerized freight. Well, we for some time, and I'm going to loop this back to your question around governance as well. We for some time have been involved in an exercise to create better data, create better information about the performance of the supply chain. And that has multiple benefits because, obviously we're looking at it through the lens of where are there opportunities to create efficiencies from a transportation perspective. But we also want to know, what types of things can be done to improve the infrastructure that serves this industry. What types of regulatory and legislative changes could be made to create a more enabling environment for our supply chains and for the stakeholders within? What type of process improvements and process controls need to be put in place across the supply chain? All of that is informed by data. And I think there's a parallel here with respect to the policy environment, the legislative and regulatory environment on the environmental side. We need to look for ways in which we can create a more enabling environment for the Canadian industry. And that can be done by creating better quality evidence and information to inform those decisions. Again, back to your question around governance, we've run into similar challenges in building systems that measure performance and benchmark performance in transportation. We've had multiple stakeholders from within the agriculture industry involved in these initiatives, and the discussions have spread beyond into forestry, into mining, into automotive, into chemicals, et cetera. Shared assets, shared infrastructure. Everybody has to have a common view of what's most important. And when you bring together people, of course, they have their own position and their own perspective and their own view to what is necessary to optimize their own performance within that context. But we can find a place at which they understand that there is an opportunity through working together to find common ground that allows us to look at what would allow us to achieve greater throughput through this whole system. And it's at those points where we can connect private good and public good that we find that common ground. And I think there's a parallel here for us on the National Agri-Food Index and performance side of things from an agri-food perspective, as well as where are we understanding and appreciating the private good and the things that need to be done to enable companies to become more competitive, and where does that translate into an industry's competitiveness as well.
It sort of comes back to where Bill was at earlier around the ecosystem that has to function here. All those pieces need to sort of come together at once, and or at least to move up the line a little bit concurrently. Janine, do you have a perspective around how an index and better benchmarking informs decision making a bit differently, or offers a new way to look at choices or options?
Yeah, so I think, you know, going back to the comments around policy and individual good or private sector good versus public good, and you know, I think that that the policy environment, that there you know, there's work that can be done, or there's improvements that can be made from the policy standpoint in terms of bridging the capital gap. I attended the PIC webinar last week about how entrepreneurs in this space are you know, there's that gap in terms of where they're struggling to finance projects or to acquire capital to move these things forward. And I think that, you know, that having this framework of discussion inform policy that helps us bridge that gap, right? So we've got you know, again, we can help incubate or help get new entrants in the space, or new processes or new technologies and those sorts of things as they scale and they need capital. If we can have these benchmarks this whole discussion around ESG inform that policy, that then helps us bridge that capital gap, or helps get these opportunities, get these companies to a point where we can then finance them from a more traditional standpoint, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. Would anyone else like to comment? Because this issue of the policy lens or changing decision making sort of touches pretty well everything. Did Bill want to give you a chance? Is there anything you like to jump in on that?
Yeah, maybe just echo a bit of the commentary around evidence-based policy, right? And so I think, you know, your question, David, was how will this inform policy on a go-forward basis? Well, I don't know that we know exactly, but the idea that we are going to have better data, better information on a go-forward basis could inform all sorts of policy decisions on a go-forward basis. And because we've got the value chain represented right from producer to retail, I think we do have an opportunity to think that through. I can't sit here today and say what that's going to be, but the concept of evidence-based policy being driven out of the work that we're doing here today, and a better understanding of, you know, all of the measurements around sustainability, the three pillars of sustainability, I think will be a really important outcome of the work that we're kicked off today, that we maybe is an unintended benefit of the work that we're doing.
I want to take a minute and look at the other side of the coin. Where are some cautions and limitations? We've talked a lot about its potential, a lot about its hope for how this can create change. I mean, there are some things that we haven't had time to do, and a person questioned whether have we engaged all producers or many producers, and rather than organizations, and the answer to that is no, but hopefully that will be something in the future that could take place. Data is a limitation. We don't have all the data we need, frankly, or the metrics that we need to support the claims. Are there some cautions that you're seeing, whether from this conversation or just as we think about navigating this to move it forward? Anything, risks, maybe another way of putting it, that we need to pay attention to? So you're giving good advice to us, because this is going to be recorded and we can do as a must see for all of our partners. Bill, or Elena, is there a caution or a limitation risk that's in front of your minds?
I might just mention, I think a caution is that, this measurement is key. The metrics are vital. It proves up, all of the sustainable practices we've already got in place, with what we know is more to come. On the farm, we're continuously improving our sustainable practices, and we ourselves are gathering our own data now on the farm to be able to prove up our own results. But the caution is that this has to be a practical approach at the production level. Farmers need to be able to see, why is this a benefit? They recognize it's going to be complex, and there will be, things that will be perhaps challenging for them, on the measurement side. I mean, I know right now you're talking about aggregate data, David. So of course we're not talking about individual, but eventually as things improve, you're going to need that data to be able to fulfill the index. So let's make sure we're practical. Let's make sure we're absolutely not demanding something that is ridiculous or adds all kinds of cost to the operation. And then I think the other, for me, the other caution in this is that I hope we will remain as a full sector approach, that it isn't one against the other. It isn't that one protein source is better than the other. It isn't one crop better than the other. I think we are in this together. And the caution then is to make sure that we allow others to kind of catch up, right? Like there might be some leading innovators on this, but we need to not to stall progress, but to be patient with those that need to be brought along. And then the last thing I might mention is that I hope governments will be open-minded to be able to see that agriculture is the solution on sustainability, because we know we are. We're not where we need to be, but I mean, what sector is? This is, again, as I said, about innovation and continuous improvement, but that the government will, both all provincial governments, but for sure our federal government will be open-minded to see this initiative of the industry in the spirit in which it's offered, which is that we are the solution. We're trying to prove up the data to demonstrate we're the solution, but to be open-minded to allow agriculture to be the solution that we are.
Very, very good cautions. Thank you. Janine, I'm going to go Janine, Greg, and Bill. Janine, what's a caution or cautions or risk that you see that we have to just keep a little bit of attention to here?
I agree with Elena's comments around making sure that it's reasonable, and I think that not losing sight of the economic sustainability component is critically important to the success of this. So I think that would be my takeaway.
Oh, great, thank you. I agree with that. Greg, what do you think is a caution that we need to pay attention to?
Well, I think we can't look at this or any other initiative that's being undertaken in this country right now as a silver bullet solution. So we also have to respect the fact that there are multiple different things that are going to have to come into play here, and together those things are going to help us achieve that level of credibility that we've been talking about all morning as a nation that's now engaging with the EU, engaging in COP27 discussions, engaging in UN Food Systems Summit, et cetera. There are multiple different initiatives at play and underway in Canada that need to be considered together. So no one size fits all solution or silver bullet solution. I think the second one has already been mentioned. The index doesn't replace what's currently required of individual companies. So it's not going to change the fact that climate-related financial reporting is still going to be a factor for many companies. There are companies within our sector that are already required to fill out benchmarking information for their buyers and demonstrate a commitment to continuous improvement in order to continue to serve those buyers in Europe, for example. So that doesn't change with the National Agri-Food Performance Index either. So we want to make it clear that we're not, assuming that this is going to somehow replace all of the requirements that are already in place and that will continue to come into play for Canadian companies. Lastly, and I think to Elena's point, and I want to make sure that I emphasize this because I know that, I've been emphasizing the pulse potential and the pulse opportunity here, but yeah, to her point, this is an all of agriculture approach. There are many different people sitting around the table. I really appreciate the work that's been done to draw government together with industry through this initiative. That while our salaries are paid by pulse growers, those pulse growers are wheat growers or canola growers or barley growers or flax growers, et cetera. And on the other end of the food value chain, the consumer is never eating a whole pulse all by itself, whether it's a whole pulse on a plate, it shares that plate with a range of other foods. And if it's a food ingredient, if it's a pulse ingredient, then it's being combined, as I mentioned before, with either meat, dairy, or other cereal grains. So, we're very highly conscious of the fact that this is an all of agriculture approach, and you have to take systems approaches when you think about sustainability and the opportunity that's here for Canada, and in the context of enhancing the nutrient density of food we put on people's plates and reducing the emissions associated with that food as well.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Bill, what's your caution?
Yeah, I think two things I'd hit on, and one is around the data and information flow. So this is, at some level, a bit of a data challenge, right? Because this all has to be rooted in measurement and metrics, and we're going to get into that. And it all starts at the producer level. And I can really appreciate Elena's perspective that this needs to be simple and easy for producers and has to show value to them. I know this isn't about the other investments we've made at Protein Industries Canada, but we do have a number of projects aimed at trying to drive and understand data management on farm, interoperability of data through the system, and using it to try to measure sustainability at the first step. So I hope we can dovetail some of the investments we've made in other Protein Industry Canada projects to help support the overall move towards these matrices. The other point, David, I'd like to say is, we're being very transparent here. We're going through this process of looking at sustainability metrics, and we might uncover some things where we need to improve in Canada, be that environment, be that social, be that economic. We need to be prepared to deal with those as an industry and fix those to make sure that the whole of the agriculture system in Canada is sustainable. And so when you go down a road like this, you might uncover some things that you might not want to see, and we got to be ready for that, and we got to be ready to deal with it.
Well, in fact, I can't scoop where we're going, but those conversations have occurred in many of our working groups. We only have a few minutes left, and now we're going to take the inevitable elevator ride. And we're going to start with Elena. Elena, you are going up the elevator with an environmental NGO. How would you communicate to this NGO why the index is important to them?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Well, I think I would say, we have shared interests and mutual goals. We're trying to look at having the least amount of environmental impact on our practices to be able to produce food for you, for Canada, and for the world. And so this index is really going to make a difference for all of us, because it's going to be an agreed set of criteria that we'll measure against and we'll be able to improve upon. So I hope you'll come to the table with us because we're all in this together.
You've just got to your floor. Janine, you're going up the next elevator and you're riding with a consumer. What do you need to communicate to that person about why this index is important?
I would say to that's a tough one too, but I would say to the consumer, this index is going to make you feel really good about going to your grocery store and grabbing Canadian food products off the shelf or out of the meat case or whatever part of that store that you happen to be have the most affinity for, but it's going to make you feel really, really safe and secure about the food that you're eating and who is producing it.
You got off right at the right time. Greg, you're going up the elevator and you're going up with the Minister of Agriculture. You can choose whatever jurisdiction. What's your message to him or her?
This is Canada's big opportunity to differentiate itself from the world. We've spent a decade now as a pulse industry identifying opportunities for us to differentiate ourselves from other plant-based ingredients, from pulses from other origins. And we feel we're on the cusp of being able to establish that space that leaves us, that makes us very hard to compete with in terms of an ingredient that contributes both to healthy outcomes for people and healthy outcomes for the planet. This is Canada's opportunity to demonstrate to the world that it's prepared to measure our performance to benchmark it and to demonstrate how we're going to continuously improve our performance so that we can outcompete other sources of products from competing origins from around the world. It's time to invest in Canadian agriculture, and it's time to invest into delivering outcomes that matter.
Well, you just reached the same floor, and now, Bill, you have the pleasure of two people coming on your elevator. You have a large producer, and you have a CEO of a food company, and they've both come on. What is your pitch to them to bring them onto the national index track?
Yeah, I would say, to the producer, that this is our opportunity to differentiate ourselves from other jurisdictions and extract value from what it is that we're providing the world. And we're not only providing the world food products and commodities and ingredients, we're providing the world the experience of producing and accessing products from Canada. And for the CEO of the food company, I think, it's almost the same thing, because really we're after the same thing. Whether you're a producer or you're a food company, you want long-term sustainable ingredients that are produced that your end use consumer wants to utilize. And so, this index meets, both of your needs, even though one's a supplier and one's a producer.
Well, thanks. It really comes back to that systems thinking. I think with that, we will conclude our discussion. I'd like to thank Elena and Janine and Greg, and then earlier on, Steve, and of course, Bill, for your great comments, your provocative thoughts. These were all unscripted for our audience. They were really off the cuff. We've noted some comments and questions that we were not able to get to in the detail, but we will keep those. I will look at those closely. And I just want to, on behalf of the 80 partners, a deep expression of appreciation to Protein Industries Canada, that really did make a substantive investment in making this possible, with the support of other partners, and many of whom are devoting an incredible amount of in-kind time to advancing this work. But PIC really did catalyze this, and I just want to express my appreciation on behalf of the entire group. And with that, I think, unless Miranda, who's on the line, I should be doing something else as moderator, I think we've pretty well wrapped this up. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.